I'm going to talk about what happens when you have these food sensitivities or you have these other problems. Really, autoimmune disease is what we're looking at. Thyroid disease is what we're looking at today. We're going to talk about a couple big concepts for all of you, but really I want to set the stage. Today's goal in the next 30 minutes is for me to reinvent every single one of your lives. I'm going to give you information today that's going to add maximum positive impact to the rest of your life. I'm hoping to give you information that very well may give you an exit strategy if you are currently suffering. If you or a loved one has an autoimmune disease, has thyroid dysfunction, is sick and tired of taking medications and don't seem to get the answers you're looking for, this information is going to help you. Now, as we talk about autoimmune disease, it's increasing every single year in the United States. We spend more money on medicine than any other country combined, but we're getting sicker every single year. Most cases of autoimmune disease are not diagnosed. They continue to progress and get worse and worse over time. And conventional healthcare has very little to offer besides steroids. If you have an autoimmune disease, they can give you certain medications that will help keep it in check. Now, conventional and alternative healthcare doesn't necessarily understand the complexity of autoimmunity. You know, hey, you have this immune reaction, take this medication, and that's about as deep as they go. But it all leads to tissue destruction in your body. So, if we talk about gluten, over the past few years, there's been a sharp increase in the interest in research on the topic of gluten sensitivity specifically. If we go back, we really probably shouldn't be calling it gluten sensitivity though. We should be calling it gluten toxicity, because that really shifts the focus back onto the cause of the problems, which for many people is gluten itself. In 1971, there were 71 published studies in the medical literature. It's called Medline. And that's really, when you relate to everything that had to do with celiac or gluten sensitivity, 71 studies. Last year, there were nearly 776 studies. That is a huge increase over the past 30 to 40 years. If we talk about the gluten food link itself, you know, we know that the gluten-free industry, this event, I mean, we're talking a $6 billion a year industry now, and we're seeing a profound shift in the way that people look at wheat. They look at, you know, what should we be eating in our diets? Whole wheat used to be celebrated as, you know, this powerhouse health food. Eat your whole grains. It's what you need to survive. But there are people that are now rejecting those whole grains, and we're seeing, you know, they may very well be eating grains, and that could be causing their illnesses. Is it causing their IBS? Is it contributing to their autoimmune disease? Is it contributing to their brain ADHD? You know, I think the frustrating thing is, even with all this research that's now done, we go to the doctor, and nothing truly gets done to get us the results that we want. I'm sick and tired of that, and I know most of my patients are as well. You know, and what I know right now is, unfortunately, when you go to your doctor, they don't know what they're doing. They really don't. They, you know, how long have you guys had your autoimmune disease? If anybody here has an autoimmune disease and is willing to say it, would you raise your hand? Okay. Have you had this disease more than 5 years? Keep your hands up. Okay. They don't know what they're doing, and that's proof right there. If they did, you would have your disease. It would be completely in remission 6 months after you were diagnosed. And you're living with this problem now 5, 10, 15 years later. Now, it's not all bash your doctors. We can't do that. It's really unfair. But the reality is the overwhelming majority of physicians don't read medical journals. I talked about those 10,000 articles on gluten last year alone. There's no time in a modern insurance-mandated world for doctors to keep up with current literature. They rely on what they learned in school. They rely on, you know, and that could be 20, 30, even 40 years ago. They rely on what their drug reps tell them, or they rely on position statements put up by their organizations. If you know anything about research, an opinion statement is not a very good form of research. It's quite simply, it's outdated. So, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters for every single one of you, for every single one of my patients that I see in my practice, is results. And you're not getting any. So, we're going to talk about what we have to do to get you those results. And the reason you go to your doctors, they're not getting you better. You know, your hands were up before. It's because insurance covers him. If they were good, you'd go to them, but he's not good. I mean, I hate to say it, but that's the reality. So if we're going to get you better, we have to talk about what's actually causing your autoimmune disease. One thing that I want you guys to understand, there's a term that I use. It's called a web of physiological dysfunction. If you guys want to write that term down, it's great. We have it available, written down elsewhere if you don't want to write anything. But you know, none of you has just one problem. If you have IBS, if you have celiac or Crohn's, it's not just one problem. If you have Hashimoto's, it's not just one problem. If you have MS, you don't just have one problem. Physiologically, it's an impossibility. When I talk about a web of physiological dysfunction, what I'm really talking about is a wide range of different problems. Liver issues, gut issues, stomach issues, brain issues, emotional issues, toxicities. You look at this list, hormonal imbalances, adrenal issues, blood sugar problems. There's so many different things that contribute to the symptoms that you're dealing with. If you go to a specialist who deals with this little piece, and this little piece, you're never going to get your body better because they're not looking at that whole web of dysfunction that you're suffering from. It's very confusing, and unfortunately, a lot of the doctors that you see also feel like it's confusing, so they kind of pass it back to the next specialist. I had a patient yesterday that basically had a TSH that was 0.1, now that's hyperthyroid. The doctor said your labs look good. A month later she goes back, it's again 0.1. Oh yeah, go to a specialist. I mean, literally, it completely passed the buck on this patient, and it's really a shame because it was there the first time. It was something that there's no excuse for them missing something like that. If we don't address 6 problems I'm about to talk about, you're never going to fix your autoimmune disease. The first thing that we're going to talk about is gut function. And this is huge. Even Hippocrates, the father of medicine, said, look to the gut, you'll find the cause of almost all human illness. If we look at that, there's a huge link between your immune system and your gastrointestinal tract. Up to 80% of your immune system is actually in your gut. It's called enteric immunity. And with that, poor gut function is usually due to one of 2 major causes. Food sensitivities, and I know we're going to talk about that a lot today, and you want to learn more about those, but also gut infections. So as we talk about these causes, how do you know if you have food sensitivities? We talk about celiac disease. The testing we just heard is not that good. If you feel like you have a problem with gluten, you cut it out of your diet and you feel better, and your doctor says you can still eat it, you're negative for it. That's very confusing. What about other foods like dairy or soy? Or what about egg or yeast or coffee? There's a lot of other foods that are out there that people realize, do I have an issue with the food or do I not? How about gut infections? Doctors don't run enough testing looking for infections. Unless your white blood cell count is so low or you have a fever that's crazy, they're not going to do the right testing. And the key thing is parasites, bacterial infections, yeast overgrowth. These things can be tested for, and they are driving gut dysfunction. How about abnormal levels of healthy bacteria? It's called dysbiosis. We've all heard of probiotics. The reason why people take probiotics is because we need bacteria in our gut. This good flora helps us fight off infections, helps us keep a healthy immunity. If we don't have good flora, we're not going to have a healthy immunity. How about stomach acid imbalances? If any of you have been diagnosed with reflux, or notice if you take omeprazole or Prevacid or any other proton pump inhibitor and you feel better, most likely you're not actually suffering from high acid problems. You're suffering from low acid problems. It's called hypochlorhydria. As we age, our body stops producing stomach acid as much as it did when we were younger. And even Dr. Oz a month ago mentioned this is one of the biggest myths that he sees, is people who have acid reflux do not have an acid problem, they have a digestive problem. The issue is you're not digesting food properly. Now there's another condition. The last condition is called leaky gut syndrome that we see. Now leaky gut is something that has really been misunderstood by medical providers for decades. And over the past 5 to 10 years, all of a sudden they're now realizing, because there's enough research that's been there, that shows it's very real. Leaky gut syndrome is really a key concept that when you put food into your body, when you have the wrong foods, the wrong medications, stressors, you develop inflammation, you develop toxicities that go out and attack the rest of your body. So when we talk about a food sensitivity, somebody asked the question to Ruth earlier, what's the difference between an allergy and a sensitivity? Our sensitivity is real. Food allergies, and we often talk about that, and people say, hey, I went to the allergist, I got tested. It's almost pointless, in my opinion, unless you have a reaction that you know about. And when we talk allergy, we're talking about anaphylactic shock. You have an allergy to peanuts, you have an allergy to shrimp, you get a spontaneous or instantaneous, oftentimes life-threatening reaction. And you really, again, know what you're dealing with. So the majority of patients do not have that severe reaction from the immune system. What they have is a reaction to the immune system that causes, and sometimes some symptoms, upset stomach, coffee jitters, gastritis, or oftentimes they don't have gut symptoms at all, but they still have an immune reaction. And when we talk about a food reaction versus a food sensitivity, what we're dealing with is it can oftentimes be silent. You may be eating wheat and have no idea you have a problem with it at all, but you know what? Your concentration isn't what it used to be. You have brain fog, you have depression, your personality is different. And that could be the only symptom that's there. You don't even associate it with what you're eating. So if we talk about gluten sensitivity versus celiac disease, Two comments I want to share with you, and these were published in 1999, British Medical Journal. If you talk about celiac disease with symptoms versus gluten sensitivity, only 12.5% of celiacs had symptoms. 87.5% showed positive for celiac disease but had no GI symptoms at all. That is a huge number. So you may have problems processing, reacting against wheat, and literally you don't even know it. Gastroenterology 2001, for every symptomatic patient with celiac disease, there are 8 patients with celiac disease and no GI symptoms. The research is there. You go to your doctor and they say, well, they don't read the research. We talked about that. I mean, so they're ignoring these studies. And the problem is they're going there and they're saying, hey, there's nothing wrong. How about gluten sensitivity has been linked to autoimmune disease. Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune thyroid disease. In patients who have symptomless celiac disease, need 49% more T4, that's the main thyroid hormone that our body produces, to balance TSH compared to a non-celiac Hashimoto's patient. What that means is if you're on a low dose of Synthroid and you're eating gluten, there's a very good chance coming off gluten may allow you to come off that medication, depending on how low that dose is. And again, I have seen patients that have had T4 levels come up significantly just by changing their diet. How about gluten overstimulates the immune system? There's really no practical difference between celiac and gluten sensitivity. It's an immune response. Just is it affecting you in the gut, or is it affecting you in the thyroid, the brain, or somewhere else? You know, in my experience, a gluten-free diet is a must for any autoimmune disease. If you have MS, if you have Sjogren's, if you have rheumatoid, if you have Hashimoto's, if you have lupus, you have to go gluten-free. And the testing can help us confirm that, but the link is there. And really a large part of the problem on testing is the traditional testing that's out there is incomplete. So, you know, some of you say, well, my doctor tested me for gluten. She talked about that again earlier. And the doctors say, you're fine, you're negative for a celiac panel. Most labs only test one part of the gluten, specifically alpha-gliadin or tissue transglutaminase. You know, there's actually other parts of wheat. There's actually 13 other parts, and we talk about gliadin, glutenin, lectins, deaminated gliadins. All these other parts of wheat you may react against, but you may not show up because that panel didn't test for it. There's actually a panel I use called through Cyrex Laboratories. Cyrex Labs is the most accurate and most sensitive test currently available for gluten sensitivity. They actually look at 13 aspects of your immune response to wheat itself, and it looks at several markers that actually help point towards an autoimmune disease in your body. But it's not just gluten, and this is a key thing. You may be gluten-free, but you still have symptoms. You may react against dairy, coffee, oats, rye, barley, spelt. Those make sense. They have gluten sensitivity to them. But what about soy or egg? And what about, you know, gluten-free grains like tapioca, teff, quinoa, buckwheat, or sorghum? You know, even corn, rice, or potato. So the key thing is you may have these food sensitivities, and when you eat them, your body is attacking your body, or is attacking itself. Even if it's only one that you're sensitive to, if you eat that one, that's all that matters. And just so you all know, you cannot eat a little bit of gluten. And most of you probably know this, but I usually saying you can't be 90% pregnant. And it's all or nothing. And if you cheat even a little, you're looking at 2+ months of inflammation on your body. Even a communion wafer can put you back that far. So how about infections? So we talk about the gut. I look for H. pylori, Klebsiella, E. coli. So if you have stomach problems, these are huge. What about parasites? Sushi is great for us, right? But it's raw fish. Lake Norman, Lake Wylie are great lakes, but they're lakes. Don't drink the water. You know, you travel to other countries. The key thing is if your immune system is compromised, you can pick up an infection. And we have to be able to test for that because that can be driving. And you may just have fatigue. You may not even have GI symptoms, but that infection can be there driving your immune response. Even Candida or Saccharomyces yeast problems can contribute as well. So leaky gut syndrome, we talked about this a little bit. The medical literature is now saying it's a prerequisite for autoimmune disease. When you develop that, what ends up happening is you get this inflammation. That inflammation causes a breakdown in the lining of your gut. That breakdown allows antigens, enemies if you will, to come into your body. Those enemies, it could be foods, it could be infections, go and they attack. When that happens, it can actually perpetuate those food sensitivities. So you may have started with one problem, but as the gut got weaker and weaker, you developed 3 or 5 or 10 sensitivities out of it, which is why a lot of times when you cut out one food, you end up realizing that you have problems with more foods that you didn't know about. The leaky gut can be the missing piece that can help correct that imbalance. Unstable blood sugar is something we have to look at. So optimal functioning blood sugar is 85 to 99. If it gets too low, it's going to kill nerves. If it's too high, that's insulin resistance, that leads to diabetes. We know the dangers with that. We're going to get you better. if I'm going to fix your life, I have to fix your blood sugar. It's the key thing we have to look at. Blood sugar affects so many different things. And again, there's no such thing as it's 102, so it's borderline. You are insulin resistant if you're above 100. And if it's really low, let's say you wake up and you test your blood sugar or you get it drawn and it's 72 or 75, that's hypoglycemic. I mean, that creates its own problems. I see a lot of thyroid patients that have low blood sugar that can lead to as many issues as patients who have high blood sugar. By the way, blood sugar is what our body uses to function. Our brain needs sugar and oxygen in order to work right. If we don't have proper sugar, we're not going to have proper function. The adrenals are the third thing we have to look at. Now, the adrenal gland sits on top of our kidneys. They're our stress gland. They release hormones like cortisol. Now, cortisol is our stress response. There's a huge link. It causes insulin resistance. It helps blood sugar get into the cells. It can contribute to weight gain. It can disrupt thyroid function. It's toxic to the brain. Cortisol actually drives to a part of the brain that holds our memory. And if you're stressed, you're going to have short-term memory loss as a result of it. Insomnia. If anybody has trouble sleeping, cortisol actually sets your sleep cycle. It's inversely proportional to melatonin. It should be high in the morning, low at night. And if that's not your cycle, then you're not going to have trouble. Your body may be saying, hey, let's go out and party, and you want to sleep, but cortisol is spiking when it shouldn't be, and that's contributing to your symptoms. Mineral imbalances can come out of it. So if you talk about, you're always swelling in your legs, that could be an adrenal problem causing it. And chronic pain can also come out of it. There's actually pain fibers that come out. Epinephrine, norepinephrine can cause that. So number 4 is the thyroid. Now this is huge. If you have a bad thyroid, you have a bad brain. If you have a bad brain, you have a bad gut, and 20 other areas. The thyroid affects so many things in our body. You may not have realized this though. If you've been diagnosed with hypothyroidism, in 1998, the Journal of Endocrine and Metabolic Disorders, which is the #1 thyroid journal in the world, published that 90% of low thyroid function is the result of autoimmune disease. Now, the most common autoimmune disease with thyroid is Hashimoto's, and it's also the most common autoimmune disease in women. So if you have a thyroid problem, there's a very high likelihood that you have Hashimoto's. And you know what? If you're taking a medication, Synthroid or Armour, I don't care what you're taking, it's not fixing the autoimmunity. You may or may not need that hormone support, but you have to fix the problem that's driving it, which is the immune reaction. So literally every cell in your body has thyroid receptors, and almost every cell in your body can impact the thyroid as well. So it goes both ways. It's this crosstalk where you can have an issue in your gut. If you've had a hysterectomy, then your hormones are going to help, you have this huge issue that's going to affect your thyroid negatively. Or if you have problems with your thyroid, then you may have infertility issues as a result. It's a huge link that goes across almost every spectrum of health that we deal with. One of the doctors that I've trained with, a mentor of mine, Dr. Datis Karazian, he has a private practice in San Diego, California. He's one of the top thyroid experts in the world. Wrote a wonderful, wonderful book. All my patients get copies of it. It's Why Do I Still Have Thyroid Symptoms When My Lab Tests Are Normal. It's a great read for anybody. We do have copies out at our booth. Number 5 is anemia. So when I say anemia, I don't mean iron, just so you know. I mean red blood cell dysfunction. So you could have deficiencies, iron, B12, folic acid. You could have infections causing the anemia. You could have blood loss causing the anemia. And autoimmunity, like pernicious anemia, which is an attack on B12, could be leading to it. But a lot of times people have something called anemia of chronic disease. Basically, the red blood cells are always off. The doctor says, yeah, there's a problem. Or if you look at your own blood work, there's a flag, but your doctor ignores it. They never do anything about it because they can't do any one thing. They have to fix the whole system, and then the anemia improves over time. So when we talk about autoimmune conditions, there's a huge, huge confusion about this. And what it means is our immune system is mistakenly attacking healthy tissues in our body. It makes what are called autoantibodies. So it doesn't distinguish between self and non-self. Gluten and thyroid are a huge link, and that's something I didn't really mention on much, but there's a really big link between Hashimoto's and gluten sensitivity because genetically, the proteins are almost the same. The body can't differentiate between them. If I was to ask you guys to name autoimmune diseases, you probably wouldn't be able to come up with too many of them, and this is what's really weird. I mean, if you talk about, 50 million Americans have autoimmune disease. Hashimoto's, Graves', psoriasis, diabetes, rheumatoid, MS, Crohn's, lupus, pernicious anemia, Sjogren's syndrome, dry eyes, dry mouth, okay? That's another thing that could point towards it. Hepatitis, scleroderma, Guillain-Barré, celiac, Addison's, Meniere's, sarcoidosis, ulcerative colitis, vitiligo, Raynaud's, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. The list goes on. And you just hear about these diseases. Some of them you may have never heard of, but the key thing is so many problems that we deal with, COPD problems, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, so many of these problems have immune reactions contributing or directly causing that. So your immune system is one of the most vital things, and if you have an autoimmune disease and you're managing it just with medications, then it's not going to improve it. And what's going to happen is over time, the rest of your body is going to catch up to those medications and you're going to have more issues. When I talk about autoimmune disease, the body has to balance itself, and when it doesn't, you're autoimmune. So what happens is you have two main halves of the immunity. Th1 or cell-mediated and Th2 or humoral immunity. Bear with me, I'm going to give you a really easy analogy. A seesaw. My daughter is 6.5. She's on the seesaw on the playground. High school football player decides to come over and sit opposite her and plops down. You know what's going to happen to her? She's going to go flying. That's your immune system. So when your immune system does that, it's dysregulated. What we have to do is get your immune system to balance itself out. We look at certain parts of your immune system that help impact that Th1, Th2 balancing. There's things like Th3 or Th17. They're the other parts of the immune system that regulate it. The goal with my patients is to help remove what's pushing it, what's making it worse, but then you've got that seesaw, so you need to widen the base so then it doesn't drive, so it stays balanced. If you're autoimmune against one tissue, you may be autoimmune against other tissues. I look at 24 different markers in the body. There's a test from Cyrex Laboratories that will look at almost every area of your body for autoimmune disease with one panel. It's an incredibly beneficial panel to look at the extent of immune dysfunction somebody may have. So, some of you may have been told your lab tests were all normal. So I want to touch on this for just a second. Because the doctor will say, there's nothing wrong with me, why do you feel so bad? The key thing is, you're not running the right tests, or they're not using the right ranges. Now we've talked about some of the tests that we look at, and they don't run a lot of these tests, so we know the testing plays a role. But ranges, I use Quest, Solstice, LabCorp, the same labs your doctors use in my practice, and those ranges I get, those reference ranges, have nothing to do with optimal healthy levels. Nothing to do with where you should be. They have to do with the bell curve. It's statistics. If you think about who gets blood work done, if you go every month to get blood work done, you are a sick person. You have a problem. That statistic is going into that pool, and then your range is established out of all those sick people. So I practice functional medicine. In functional medicine, we use narrower ranges. They allow me to find problems before they become so severe that you're an outlier. The key thing we're looking for is, if you have an H or L on a lab, there's something wrong with you. But if you don't, it doesn't mean you're healthy. And that's where so many of us lie, in that in-between zone. So we have to compare it to the published functional ranges in order to help correct the problem. TSH is the biggest example I like to share. So TSH is a thyroid test. 1.8 to 3.0 is the functional range. The labs give me ranges of 0.4 to 5, 0.3 to 5.5, huge ranges. The functional range is 1.8 to 3.0, so if you're at 4.2, you are hypothyroid. Your doctor may not just be looking closely enough to identify it and help correct it. The point is, if you want to see normal, go to the next public festival, put your chair out, and just watch everybody. We have a sick, overweight, unhealthy population in this country. I don't want you to be normal. I want you to be healthy. And there's a huge difference with that. So the medical approach is to wait until tissue destruction is so bad and then squash the entire immune system, oftentimes with steroids. Take an antidepressant, it'll make you feel better, and it's basically symptom management. It doesn't address the underlying metabolic causes of your immune dysfunction. The functional medicine approach looks to remove all immune triggers. You may have food sensitivities, you may have infections, your blood sugar may be an issue, your adrenals, your hormones, the liver, gallbladder, all these different areas may be causing problems, and you may actually be taking supplements that are making you worse. Because if you have an autoimmunity, those supplements may be pushing the wrong half of your immune system. And if they are, they're not helping you. I practice what's called a neurometabolic approach. We modulate the immune system. We use dietary modification, lifestyle changes. I do use supplements based on lab findings specific to your body's needs. If you have a Th1 immune dominance, then garlic or echinacea or vitamin C may be beneficial for you. If you have a Th2 dominance, do not take green tea or grapeseed. That would be very bad for you. We address neurological misfiring for some patients in my office. We look at the brain closely. We practice functional neurology, something called brain-based therapy. And I look at the whole person. The key thing is, you're not just this one little piece, this one little gland that's malfunctioning. We have to look at the whole person and develop what's going to work best to get your life back. Beginning, I said my goal today was to reinvent your life. Hopefully I've given you guys some good information. Hopefully I feel like I've done that. But we all know knowledge plus action is how you're going to get better. So I want you guys to ask yourself, if if you decide to improve in your health what we've talked about today, what are you going to see with your life? Go forward and take the information and do something with it. But more importantly, I want you to ask yourself, if you decide not to correct anything that we've talked about, not to investigate if these are problems you're dealing with, where do you see yourself in 5 years, continuing on the same path? If you're interested in getting to the bottom of your chronic health problems, feel more than happy to come talk with me or my booth. We're right outside this door. We can talk to you about how you can find answers, resources that you can use, whether through me or elsewhere, to help you get to the bottom of your autoimmune disease. Thank you very much. I appreciate everything.